Thanksgiving?
Okay.
Kind of wait.
Oh,
Seeing-
I
see-
am. I'm just waiting.
Seeing none, I will be changing the agenda to, do I have to vote on it, or? I don't think so. Go ahead, John.
Great, thank you. Thanks for altering the agenda a little bit so that we can move through this. What you have before you is a draft of the proposed legislative platform for 2012-13. As we discussed, we have a legislative lunch coming up this Friday, and so part of this is to really go back through, kind of renew some of those issues that we've had for years in here, update it. We've thankfully have been able to eliminate a few things, but what I'll do is I'll walk through this and kind of give you an idea, knowing full well that eventually this will go before the full board for a vote. But if we had some direction from both this committee and the other, that would give us some leeway for this Friday when we're talking with lawmakers. If there are any other questions, right now I'm just going to start and walk through it. Under the guiding principles, these are unchanged from previous years. The acknowledgement of the one-size-fits-all, maintaining local control, having a financial structure that is fair and equitable based on student need, and each and every individual student's need. Any kind of mandates should be fully funded, and we have to be sensitive to the fiscal impact to the state school aid and state retirement for any reforms and changes that are made, aka personal property tax would be the most notable example. So those are kind of the guiding principles. Under the critical issues, and these are not listed in order of priority, the first one is new. And this is something that we talked about, the need to send a very clear message to the legislature, the governor, the state school board, that as they are implementing this train of reforms that just keeps getting more and more reforms added to the train every single year, what they're doing is creating unnecessary and excessive churn, meaning that they keep reforming for the sake of reform and change, but they're not giving the time nor the resources to allow the reforms to be implemented effectively and to measure whether or not those reforms are working before they start changing and reforming again. So this, in many ways, is much like the transformation plan concept that said, you know what, we need to go big, but then we need to create stability, we need to create certainty, and we need to give it time for the reforms to take place. And so this is not a legislative clear, it's just more saying as the legislature looks at reforms, as the MD looks to implement, they've got to start looking more at the timing of those reforms and look at whether it's just creating churn or change for the sake of change. Part of this is the MDE, for example, does a lot of last-minute notifications. We'll receive word and say that you have 5 days to respond, and it's been like that, particularly since Race to the Top. Since almost 3 years ago, we've experienced these reforms.
One of my questions, I guess, is how much of this is indicative of what's going on with the federal government? I mean, like the waivers with NCB.
Sure. No, it's tied to that. This is not just limited to the state, and in fact, that would be language that we could add here, is making sure that federal, because really, much of what's happening at the state level is based on what the feds have said. A lot of it was tied to the Race to the Top funding, and so we also know much of the more recent change is tied to the No Child Left Behind waiver request from the state to the feds. Again, this is part of it's just sending the right message that says stop and think about all of the churn and change you've put in the system. Give it time and the necessary resources to work, and that the MDE needs to look from a customer service standpoint. How can they not be doing these last-minute knee-jerk type reactions? We understand they're probably getting pressure from the federal government, so we can update this language to make sure to add federal. Make sense?
Questions about that?
Okay. The second one here is actually we had three separate, we had dedicated school aid funding, restoration of per pupil funding, and maintaining the 2X formula as three separate items in the previous platform. In talking with Mr. O'Connor, we thought we could combine these under one. In essence, this says, the intent of Proposal A was to establish a dedicated and protected source of revenue. The legislature has rated that for 2 years in a row. They've also cut funding by more than $600 per pupil. We're asking that the funding be restored at minimum to the 2010-11 levels. We're asking that they maintain the 2X funding formula, which was done in 2007-8, and that they that any kind of funding, as they look at it, for example, if there's going to be a tax cut or some other impact, that the funding be restored completely. And we talk about the personal property tax later, but that's what's listed under this. No big surprises here.
Is there any ongoing pushback about the expansion of it to cover higher ed?
There is, but I think, from my observation, has been there's that constant language that says, you've rated this was not what the intent was. But I think there's also some, I don't say there's less resistance. I think it's kind of been fact for 2 years now. And while the education lobby continues to express concern, the legislature does not appear to be moving in any way different than that. And if anything, I think there's what we're already seeing in the Lisa Lyons legislation to expand school choice would actually increase the partnerships between the community colleges and the K-12 system, which at one point in time we used to be together. Make sense? All right, sinking fund technology expansion. This is pretty much the same language. I added a few things just to clarify more. We talk about modifying the sinking fund law to make it so it's more in line with what we can do with bond funding. Right now, basically, the sinking fund says it's for warm, safe, and dry, but not technology. And we know with 21st century teaching and learning, the need to frequently update and replace technology is going to be an ongoing expense, something that the general fund, there are not general fund resources there to sustain that. So to be able to have a separate dedicated source, whether it's a bond or in this case a sinking fund, that the law should be updated. We've heard that this is one we might have some legs in legislature. This is one they've been looking for ideas, and this could be one of those quick and easy fixes, assuming that we're able to work with our lawmakers on it.
When was the original sinking fund legislation written?
It was in the 90s, I think. I'm not entirely I'll find out, but it's
interesting to know.
Yeah,
if this was even on their radar.
As I recall, there was a reluctance to do the sinking fund to begin with, and that's, I think, where the term sinking fund came from, and that they tried to keep it as narrow and limited in scope. And at the time, I don't think that they were concerned about 21st century technology. I think it was more aimed at basic warm, safe, and dry improvements, and there was consensus for it.
And it was probably the reluctance came out of post-Prop A of not revisiting
Absolutely.
the inequities of,
Yep.
communities' ability to tax themselves.
That would start to chisel or erode away at
Yeah.
what Proposal A ultimately attempted to do.
Are there other districts also requesting this change to the sinking fund?
Yes, but I don't think it's one of those it's been on their list, but they've not made it near a priority. Usually funding is always the priority, or in this case, the school choice and charter expansion, all the efforts have gone into that.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to do that, but we believe that this is it's a smart message for the legislature to send and for the governor. They know that they're pushing for more technology. Well, they need to have a dedicated source, and this is a simple surgical fix that would likely receive significant support, bipartisan. Next one is the restoration preservation of categorical funds. This is almost verbatim what we had before. I felt it was important to keep this as a separate entity, to really draw out the categorical funds and to highlight what the language was before and how there were attempts to try to eliminate it. In some cases it was successful, but keeping that small class size language in there and noting that for 2 years in a row now we've been able to get them to restore 2/3 of that funding. We need to maintain that. The School Aid Act rewrite, this is also new language. This, as you know, is related to the Oxford Foundation report that was recently released by Richard McClellan that already has legislation drafted. This would essentially create a voucher-like system and to support kind of an educational free-for-all where the dollars can follow the child to multiple sources and would create significant accounting challenges and really divert attention away from teaching and learning and more to pupil accounting. And that's not our core business. This legislation seems to be looking for a problem and we're not sure what problem they're trying to solve here. That the solution is not to create kind of a voucher-like system. What we have done here is put language in there that talks about if the goal of the intent of the rewrite is to ultimately get to what our educational goal is, which is what? Graduating every child and making sure that they're college and career ready. If that's the case, then that has to assume a funding formula that recognizes that each and every child achieves and learns in a different way, at a different pace. They may be at different points of the starting gate, whether they're English language learners, special ed, poverty, all grade level, all these different things play a role in whether that child is able to get to that point of graduation and be college career ready. We're recommending that the Board of Ed adopt this language that really pushes for a needs-based funding formula. That you'll see there's also language in here that talks about expressing strong disappointment in the process, timing, and approach by which the governor took this. Right now, you have 5 white guys and 1 Hispanic woman who's the head of the CMU charter school office that wrote this. This was not an inclusive process. It was not a transparent process. It was not a process that acknowledged that we have education professionals that know what it takes to do teaching and learning well, and they were not involved in this process whatsoever. And so you'll see we're also encouraging the board recommend that a new bipartisan committee that's comprised of representatives from the urban districts, rural districts, suburban districts, charters, non-publics, English language learners, special ed, a very cross-section that's bipartisan to really look at. We know there's the need for a rewrite. We know the legislature has been slowly but surely going after these categoricals, in part because they don't understand why the categoricals were there to begin with, to largely fix the shortcomings of Proposal A. And so this is one proactive approach. Instead of just saying, no, we oppose it, let's come at it with some solutions. A, there should be a committee. B, we should look at based on student need.
It seems really important to revisit the values of the last school aid rewrite, Prop A, and that underlying that was an attempt to create more equity across the state. So that principle to start with, the next rewrite of the School Aid Act, I mean, it seems like we need to make that front and center as well.
That's a great point. We can add, because there's not a lot of there is no reference in this part around the equity part. I like that, where we can add language that talks about the need to revisit the core values, and that the intent was to create equity, because right now you do not have equity. We're better off now from an equity standpoint than we were, but it's still a wide gap.
Well, and the Oxford report certainly would not, that proposal certainly wouldn't, doesn't start from that.
Right.
I'm guessing there's very little to no understanding in the current legislature about the original intent and writing of Proposal A.
Yeah, I think they understand the very basics, that it was to address property taxes.
But not
I
the
bet you
whole
if you
equity.
asked, that would be the first thing the equity would be maybe number 2, if they even really aware of the equity part. That's about, I mean, I think that's about the extent of what you get. So that's part of our challenge. And when we go, when we met, for example, with Representative Lyons last week, and we talked about our concerns, and we talked about the need to look at basically the needs of students, that just a free-for-all funding system is not at all tied to what the core business is of academic achievement. And we went into detail about the different mandates, both federal and state, for servicing students with high needs. And that basically the author of this Oxford Foundation told us, well, this wasn't written for special ed and English language learners. It was more of a choice and bill than it was anything else. And so on its core, there was not a lot of thought put into this. It was not sensitive to the academic needs of all children, and that's the part that got lost in what the governor was proposing. All right, next one, Education Achievement Authority codification expansion. We talked about this last Monday. There's really nothing in here that's different, the board opposes the legislation. The legislation goes too far too quick with much needed deliberation. The board opposes it being done in lame duck, strongly opposes the takeover of local schools, but did keep language in there that said we understand, basically recognizes the main reason for the EAA codification is to codify the DPS, Detroit Public Schools intergovernmental agreement. That's the main intent, but then they threw the kitchen sink as well. And so that's part, I put that language in there, we can certainly take it out, but I think that sends a message that recognizes, we understand there's a problem that does need to be fixed, but the kitchen sink is not the solution.
And the Detroit situation is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they already have an intergovernmental agreement between Detroit Public Schools and the state of Michigan, and all they wanted, the intent is to just codify that in state law.
Right.
Without.
Related to the Achievement Authority is this bottom 5% definition, and I know that's connected to the waiver with NCLB, but I'm wondering whether we should include some redress to that definition, because it doesn't, to me, it doesn't get at failing schools.
Yeah.
You know, that you should be looking at trajectories regarding the achievement gap, not bottom 5%.
I think that's a great idea. Being able to create a little bit more criteria or clarification around what that definion is.
And other states have, I know.
Right now, it's based heavily, it's actually double weighted on proficiency, not on growth. And so the one size fits all test scores are what they largely are basing their decision on. And we don't believe that's a full or fully accurate reflection of what is happening. And so potential criteria would look at, is there demonstrated growth? Is there demonstrated implementation? Are the schools actually doing what they said they'd do? Because on that 5% list, there's a big difference between districts like GRPS that are very well managed, that are implementing aggressively, and others that are dysfunctional, that aren't doing what's necessary to improve their academic and financial situation. And it seems like those should be priority one for the state, where their board, their superintendent, were unable to manage their financial and academic situation. That seems to be, there could be some additional criteria that weights toward improving that formula, and then also dedicating resources and timing around the greatest need.
There's actually language in this 6004 bill that would actually disincent people from doing the right things financially for the district.
Absolutely.
So I hope they get that.
Yeah. When we met with,
Understand that.
that's something that, when we met with Representative Lyons, she was very sensitive to the argument that we made that said this actually disincentivizes us from doing a plan like the transformation plan. It basically makes it so why would we close buildings, or why would we seek to improve the capacity and use of those buildings for fear of a state takeover of a building that was locally voted on and paid for by local taxpayer dollars. And so,
and within 6004, there's language which gives the Education Achievement Authority, which is just a quasi-governmental agency, the ability to use eminent domain condemnation powers to take property from another governmental agency, which, I believe us as a school district has the ability to use eminent domain if necessary, but I could not find any examples in which school districts used
I didn't know that.
taking powers to acquire property, especially from another governmental agency.
Right.
With the qualifications, changing the 5% qualifications, I know other states have, in their waivers, have much more, in my mind, academically sound qualifications like you're talking about. So we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. We could just point to other states' waivers and the way they defined failing schools.
Yep.
And
Can you give a couple examples?
I think Virginia does, and there's like a misunderstanding. I heard it in the national news because it was perceived as being racist, and ironically, it wasn't because they had different proficiency levels, but they were looking at addressing the achievement gap in a realistic manner. So I know Ed Trust, I was at the Ed Trust conference, that's in part why I know so much about this, but they worked very hard at trying to come up with, real criteria that could move the needle versus just punitive to people who are doing the work. So it'd be great to lead the charge on that, I think. If the intent of the Education Achievement Authority is indeed to address failing schools, then they'd be concerned about this, or they would be eager to embrace a more realistic definition.
And I'm going to try to move quickly here. MEP testing date change, this is new, and this is something that we've put out there already, and the legislature, at least their response has been, makes sense. It's one of those where right now that MEP testing is done in October for students in a high poverty area. There's the research shows there's summer learning loss that happens at a greater level than in a more affluent student. And so why not move it to spring? That's what we're proposing. School choice, this is really the same as what we had before, except for I added a one line at the end there that talks about strongly opposing the House Bill 5923, which is the Lions bill that would kind of create that free-for-all. We can certainly add more language to strengthen this, but I think it's kind of under that process that says the key thing is maintaining local control. That's what the position has been in the past. That's what it still is. And that under that same guiding principle, that's why we should be opposing 5923 as well. Keep going. Early childhood. This is just slightly changed from before. Some of the things the legislature or the governor has done a few things that we had originally recommended. And so we kept the language about creating a system of universal access to early childhood, but then added language near the middle to end that talks about the expansion of early childhood must be accompanied by statewide standards. That the Grand Rapids Board recommends that as they look at an expansion, that it must be phased in and it must account for the time and resources necessary for a local system to adjust to the change. Part of this is facilities. We're required to maintain pre-K, K, and 1 on essentially the ground floor. And so you'll see we also added language that said, look at the state construction code where it mandates this and consider how, if at all, there may be flexibility to accommodate. Because right now, there simply may not be the facilities to accommodate a significant expansion of pre-K. How many seats? It would double the number of seats we have, right?
So, John, who does this apply to? Only school districts? Because I can think of a couple examples off the top of my head that are doing preschool that are on
This
second
specifically
floors.
applies to school districts. At least that's my understanding from, what can you know?
For example, the Y has a second floor preschool.
Now, is it located right next to a stairwell, though? Because there are some exceptions.
There are some exceptions. It's specifically an at-grade exit. So we have some buildings that are multi-story, but kind of have a walkout second floor, so a part of that other story would be acceptable use for pre-K, K and 1. But essentially, it's an at-grade exit is the main fire exit without the interference from larger kids exiting behind them as a safety precaution.
All-day kindergarten, this is language, this is a change because we were successful in getting the amendment. We need to keep that amendment in there. This is the amendment that the U.S. Department of Education signed off on and preserved our ability to use Title I dollars for half of the all-day kindergarten. Fair, full, and permanent itinerant, this is unchanged. This is the same as it was before. Charter reform, we combined, we had two versions before, and you'll see we kept most of the language. It talks about a separate and unequal system, that the Michigan's charter school laws need to be reformed to increase accountability, establish a more fair and balanced playing field, requiring those charters to basically be on the same playing field with districts. We also talked about a process by which if the legislature is all about collaboration and sharing services, charters should be included in that. We, as a district, are already a model in that way, in that we do provide food service for several charter schools. And then we did keep the language in here that talked about if and as the district, as the state looks at charter schools, the role an elected school board should be included, that should be ideally done in partnership with the teachers union, that there's got to be providing full flexibility. And again, this is the exact same language that was in there before in those bullet points A through F.
So, you don't speak to it directly, but when the state law changed to include MIPSers in the per pupil funding, MIPSers funding, the charter schools are getting that, but don't contribute to MIPSers. So it's almost like, that's sort of extra revenue in their pocket for no useful purpose.
I kind of get what you're saying.
So as I understand it, the way MIPSers was funded in the past was at the state level, and then they moved it to the district level, and the districts are
I got it,
funding
yeah.
MIPSers. So this per pupil funding,
Right.
whatever that
right. And
is,
that's-
goes to a charter school that's in the same area, but they don't pay towards MIPSers if they're non-union.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems as though you should have some obligation to say, if I'm a union school, then I get that MIPSers portion, and if I'm not, I don't.
So I think that would be, because we did have a retirement reform bullet point that we've eliminated because most of what we recommended was adopted, but adding a new retirement reform that acknowledges the shortcomings with the new law and including that would make sense to me.
Just it contributes to the level playing field conversation. That's just one example where it's not level.
Okay. Unfunded mandates, Adair, same as last year. Multi-year budget, same as last year. Consolidation of services, same as last year. Exempt school cafeterias, same as last year. School board elections, this is new or updated. This talks about how the board opposed the recently enacted state law that mandates school board elections happen in November of an even year. And that it basically says they need to reform it. Part of my question to you is, do we want to add language that said if you are to have a state mandate, doing it in odd years would actually make more sense, make it less political, because that's when the nonpartisan elections occur, or we just simply say eliminate it, which is essentially what this says now.
I'm going to just leaving it as eliminated.
Yeah, I feel like we should be able to set our own elections. It's a local control issue.
And November
this-
is the worst time.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense.
And I can add certainly more negative points there, but they get the gist of it. It'd be one that we'd need to spend some time on getting them up to speed as to why the change is needed. Expanding dual enrollment, shared time, I merged the two because the language was the same. And John, I had a note that we needed to update this language, and I'm not sure what it was that we had talked about. I honestly, I looked at it, and if anything, we could maybe add language that talks about, as they look to remove some of the barriers, they have to, maintain quality, just tie it more so it's more limited and strategic, I guess, but I wasn't sure if there was something in particular.
Can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. These are things, we do support dual enrollment, and we have expanded shared time. We do a lot of shared time services. So that's kind of a collaboration, working in partnership with Grand Rapids Christian, Grand Rapids Catholic Schools, and others. Personally, property tax, this is the same as written before. Basically, the board supports it as long as we're held harmless, from a financial standpoint. Union dues, this is the same as last year. Anti-bullying, same as last year. Flexibility for voc ed, same as last year. And then the flag mandate, this is new, and this was just simply
Can I ask you
yes.
that you change one word in the anti-bullying?
Sure.
It's not sexual preference, it's sexual orientation.
Okay. Got it? Done? The flag mandate talks about urging the legislature to provide resources for the unfunded mandate, as well as flexibility in the display of the flag. Right now, the legislature mandates the type of flag, and it doesn't provide any resources for it. So we're simply saying, this is, if you're going to do it, let's make sure you put the funding behind it, because I won't go there. And that's it. The last two are also the same as previous years.
Can I just want
Yep.
to make one suggestion for the
Yep.
personal property tax replacement? I think if we could maybe beef that up a little bit and talk about, because our voter-approved tax levies would have to increase, so they're shifting the burden to support those from the businesses to the taxpayer. So all of our 2004 bonds that helped us do the 10 new buildings,
Yep.
if they don't replace that fully,
Yep.
some of
That's
that
a really
shifts to our
good point,
taxpayer.
and that seems like that would have,
How would we increase it, or just extend? I don't know. I'm not sure I understand
Well,
that.
because the voter approved the debt, we would have to increase the amount of mills that we're levying to meet that debt. So if they're pulling and reducing the amount of property taxes that would be levied,
Yeah.
then we
You're saying for
have to-
future, anytime we go, how would it apply to 2004? I don't understand how we could increase the levy without voter approval.
the voters approved us to have $90 million of bonds, right? So we have semi-annual payments that we have to make. So if the amount of we're bringing in for property taxes goes down because businesses aren't having to pay as much.
Yep.
Then we increase the number of mills we're going to levy to be able to meet that debt.
Okay.
So we'll work.
So the
we work
mill
on
levy
language
could
for that.
actually change. It's
It could
just
go
the
up.
amount. We still have, as long as it's
Just
under
on
the
debt
amount.
side.
I got it.
So we can
That's
work on
great.
some
yeah,
language.
that's seems like that would
Yeah, that's huge.
be really influence.
Now, everything we're hearing is that the schools will be exempted from the personal property tax bill that's likely to pass during this lame duck, and that the cities, I think they're like 85 to 90% funding, but then they're also going to provide an opportunity for a local assessment for industrial property, which I think, based on what Greg and the mayor had indicated, they played an active role in writing. So, sounds like they're pretty comfortable with where that's headed, but that's great new language. Anything else? Thoughts?
Not currently, but, we'll read it over before it
Yeah.
goes before the full board. and-
Yeah, that'd be great. And I do know that we had talked about your work sessions, that the legislative, essentially, committee will happen under the work sessions. So I'm not sure I'll be back before this committee with the legislative side of things unless you need me to.
For Friday, do we have, how many folks are
Oh,
committed
right.
for Friday?
You know what, Kelly's out this morning. We have a pretty full list, and it's a large contingent of our state lawmakers from not only all over the county, but a couple up in Muskegon and Montcalm. We have several city commissioners, several county commissioners, so we'll have a good group. Part of that will be Teresa giving them an update on the transformation plan. They need to see and hear that, again, we're being proactive, and that'll be part of the overall message is, here we are, the one urban district, second largest in the state, that has a balanced budget, has a fund balance, has a bond rating, is making huge strides on innovation and academic improvement, and then, obviously, picking on a few of these key pieces. We'll hand this out. She will not go through the whole thing. It's largely going to focus in on the School Aid Act rewrite and the EAA in particular, and then the categorical funds kind of in there as well. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Good
Thanks.
timing.
Yeah. Oh, cutting a little close. I should have been before you a month ago. So.
No, I mean the legislative.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah. We
You
actually.
said it before.
We did
when
actually,
legislation
that was part of the
wasn't-
reason why we did it. We knew lame duck. There's always
Yeah.
something that'll happen. And then we'll do another one in the spring, hopefully at or around when the governor does his education address, which will likely happen in April.
Will there be any representative from the governor's office at the legislative?
On Friday,
lunch? Yeah.
let me check. I think Greg Tedder, who's his education policy, he's from Grand Rapids. I'm pretty sure Greg's coming.
Great.
But I'm going to ask Erica Rosenbrook to come as well and see if she She's the head of the Governor's Urban Initiatives Office here.
Okay.
She's been actively engaged, very aware of all of our issues. We've met with Greg one-on-one. He's aware. We have a meeting coming up that Lisa Lyons is arranging with her dad, Dick Postumus, and Bill Rustum, and Greg Tedder as well. And that part of that is to review this EAA codification and talk about the concerns with that and the funding, and hopefully get them to take a broader perspective of, particularly from an urban education standpoint.
John,
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I know I took a lot of time.
you've got something sparkly on your chin.
Hey, John, can I give you?
Yep.
Just made a couple markups on this.
Okay.
All right,
All right.
back to
And
our
back up
agenda
to
there.
our agenda and to our first action item, we're presenting to a small budget for Budget Amendment 1, which really entails where we landed with our fall enrollment count, and then the related staffing increases. We worked over the summer mainly at our secondary schools. Our student count, we projected a 600 student loss. We came in at about approximately a 400 student loss. So what we're doing in this amendment is recognizing that increase in revenue. And then again, we added approximately 18 positions, mainly at the secondary level, as we work to balance those schedules throughout the summer, so that we wouldn't have as many issues this fall as we have had in the past. I don't know if you have any questions.
I have none.
All right, we'll
Yeah,
be bringing a much larger amendment to you, probably at January's Finance Committee meeting, where we'll reconcile staffing as far as actual salaries versus average. We budget, if you'll remember, we budgeted an average salary. So in January, it'll be a much more detailed amendment.
Make a motion that we move the amendment to the full board.
Support.
Motion to move the
Budget amendment.
Budget
1.
Amendment 1 to the full board. You need to do a roll call, too. We need a roll call. Okay.
You can just call.
You just
She
write it
just
down.
writes them down. Geetson, yes.
Connor, yes.
Paul, yes. Thank you, Julie. Here comes the next one, so be prepared.
We've got 4 of them, Julie. All right, the next action item is the resolution for an advanced refunding of our 2004 bonds. In 2004, we issued a little over $90 million in bonds. And then in 2007, we did an advance refunding of a little over half of that amount. And we're requesting, because the market is favorable, to do an advance refunding of the balance of the bonds, or a part of the balance of the bonds, because we can't do a refunding for the next couple years. The bonds are callable in May of 2014. An advance refunding will save us approximately $600,000, and actually will save our taxpayers.
That's fantastic.
Because it will be a reduction in what we have to levy. The process will be very similar to what we just did with the advance refunding for the 2002 certificates of participation. We'll publish a notice of sale, we'll accept bids, and then we'll award based on the best interest rate at that time.
Motion?
Motion to authorize the resolution, the bond, to pass the bond authorizing resolution.
Support.
Questions? Eaton?
Yes.
Bob, yes.
Connor, yes.
All right, our next action item is a lease for Alexander School. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Klomparens.
The lease that's recommended before you is with Divine Grace Ministries, which is Pastor Hoskins' church. It is at Alexander Elementary, which is a closed building. The area he'd like to lease is the ground floor, which includes the gym and the adjacent classrooms. The lease rate is based on what we've done for similar churches and requesting the same amount of, or similar amounts of space. There are a couple of differences. We would pay the utilities. However, we require in the lease that he would give us a schedule so we can control the temperatures when they're not in use. And he would handle all the custodial since we're not in the building. And typically what we do on a closed building from a ground standpoint is we'll maintain the lawns, mow them, et cetera. And we only plow to keep an access for our maintenance crews. So in the lease, there's a clause that he would pay for plowing for his use. Those are the main differences. It is set for 1 year, so any extension would come back to this committee and the board for approval.
Yeah, go ahead. And we have a motion first and then.
Go ahead.
A motion to move this forward?
Support.
Has this property been marketed for sale or marketed openly for lease to other prospective tenants?
We've never put it up for sale. We've had a number of inquiries and groups, probably 3 or 4 different churches go through and look at it, but none have submitted a proposal.
Looking at the square footage of the property being 15,570 square feet, $13,000, I mean, the price per square foot seems quite a bit lower than the recent lease we did for the Early Childhood Center.
But that square footage includes the boiler room and the stairways.
Right, but those leases also, I mean, did not the lease for the Early Childhood Center include utilities?
You're talking about Roosevelt right now?
Yeah. Did that not include utilities?
Yes, it did.
I don't know,
We went back and looked at the utilities and what we expected it would cost us to run this.
Is the square footage the entire building or the square footage that we're leasing to them?
That's the square footage on the ground floor.
Okay, it is.
Can I just ask do we know the purpose of the use?
For his church.
Okay.
I'd like a moment here to just pull up some information, if that'd be all right. Anybody remember when we approved the Roosevelt lease?
Are you looking for the lease itself?
Either August or September.
No, it got kind of pushed out, I think.
Didn't move back.
I thought it did too.
I think it was October.
Because it went to the board in November.
Yeah, and then it got some delay.
And I just have a little understanding. It's a vacant property that we're not currently collecting any income on at this point. However, having it not been marketed for sale in the open market and just not knowing that, just in my mind, that lease seems like it's substantially less than a lease for a building that may have been similar sized or smaller. Just want to make sure that this is fully above board here.
Roosevelt is a smaller building. That building's in the neighborhood of 6,000 square feet.
Wonder, since it hasn't been marketed, I wonder if we could do it contingent on being marketed in the open market for a 30 or 60-day period to see if we get any other interest at a higher rate. When you say other people have gone through, do you, I mean, It's just because they know the school's vacant?
Yes, they've contacted us and asked to look at the building. We've escorted them through.
Do you want to just delay this action item, or?
But the property located on the Roosevelt Building is 6,164 square feet, and that lease is $30,000 a year. This building is nearly three times as large, and it's $13,000 a year. I guess I'd just like some sense of the fact that this is a market lease. No problem with leasing the property, just want to ensure that it's a market rate lease.
The difference being that the Roosevelt property is an exclusive use. They'd be the only ones in the building and have the entire facility. This allows, the lease at Alexander allows multiple tenants potentially. It's not he does not get exclusive use. He gets exclusive use of the lower level as defined.
Understand, but it's still, the usable space is 15,000 square feet in comparison to 6,000 square feet. I mean, when you do a lease, typically it's based on square footage. Whether it's a freestanding detached unit or an attached multi-unit facility, leasable space is typically based upon square footage.
Well, you want to delay action until further study, or
Yeah, I'm
Jane's suggestion, or what would you like to do?
I'm not comfortable with it at this point.
We would agree and prefer to withdraw it and come back next
Great.
month.
Thank you. Donations.
All right. We have two donations for you this morning. The first donation is donation of furniture for our new Blandford building. The value of the donation is a little over $48,000, and it's from the Wegge Foundation. And our second donation is funding to support the second year in the development of a comprehensive educator evaluation system in the amount of $342,000 from the Douglas and Maria DeVos Foundation.
Do I have a motion?
Make a motion that we approve the donations.
Support.
With the evaluator system, I have not paid close enough attention. Have we had a reporting out at all in the Achievement Committee regarding what's been going on with that? I'm just curious.
You know, that's a good question. I don't think there has been.
Okay.
So it's certainly something I could pass along.
Yeah.
I could talk to.
That would be
Slight about
valuable.
getting
I
that
mean,
on
I've
the
sort of,
agenda.
when I saw that was going on, and then I saw later that it was Cambridge was involved, I thought, well, I know very little about what work's being done and what premise they have, because it directly, is indicative of policy. We're going to have to craft around it and support it, so it seems that the board should be cognizant and participatory in the process to some extent if we're going to be asked to craft policy with it.
Agree.
I will pass that along. We'll get that on the agenda as soon as we can.
Questions regarding the donations?
Me to call?
Yeah.
Keatson, yes.
O'Connor,
Help.
yes.
Yes.
O'Connor.
All right. Thanks. Moving on.
All right, moving on. So that takes us through our last action item. Next, we have under reports and updates, the October financial statements. Activity is pretty typical for this time of year. We received another Act 18 payment from the KISD of about $14.4 million. So we'll receive the balance of that next spring, usually around April, and that'll be about $6 million. We're still continuing to work with the state of Michigan to get our consolidated application approved so that we're able to draw down funds from our new Title I grant, our New Year's Title I grant, as well as our Title IIA I'm being very patient about that. But I'm beginning to become impatient because we know that right around the corner, a budget amendment will be due to them in January. And it's almost December, and we haven't been approved for our initial go-round yet. So it's very frustrating, to say the least, so.
Is this atypical, Julie? Typical?
Well, a little bit. It usually takes us a while. The last couple years, though, I would say more on the typical side. You know, it's really frustrating. Our team does a very good job of getting the information entered in. You have to enter in very detailed information for each school into this application, and we do it before July so that we could have a July 1 start date. So we put in some extra hours to get that done so we can have a July 1 start date, but yet here we are, the end of November, and we're still not approved to even draw down any of those funds that we've used.
And this is state level funding?
It's federal through the state, so the state has to approve our application.
It makes me wonder if we shouldn't address that in our legislative
Exactly.
platform,
I thought the
because
same thing.
we're providing services that we're not being paid for.
Well, and we're one of the
This makes
largest
no
districts in the state to receive Title I money, and here we are
And
not.
again, it's another shot at an urban district. I mean, there's not a lot of Title I dollars being consumed other than by urban districts, so it's,
Yeah, two questions. Are there other districts that are similarly affected? And what's the cause? What's your assessment of the cause for the delay?
I couldn't answer if there are other districts without, I mean, I could send something out to see if anybody else is experiencing a delay. I do know that our consultant that we've had the last few years has been reassigned. So we are actually assigned to a temporary person who's more of a supervisor in the Office of Field Services. They have not filled the position that would work directly with us. And so that's probably the cause.
So that's
of
just
it.
a bureaucratic cause. There's no
Something's wrong with the
financial
application.
or
Well, there is
political
financial.
reasons for, but motivation
Oh.
for delaying it. It's just
I don't know, but if you were a conspiracy theorist, you could really go there quite easily.
I'm just trying to understand.
I used to think I wasn't a conspiracy theorist.
I
but
used to think that too, but now after 4.5 years, I'm becoming one.
Okay, so
We'll continue to push, but I
it's not even a legislative issue then, it's just you gotta be kidding me
But,
issue.
but
All right.
could we put legislative teeth in this, so, I mean, this is,
That's
if
required,
this is a
that there's
pass-through of dollars.
penalization
Yeah,
of,
yeah, because we're paying, I mean, there is a cost to this, right?
There is a cost to this.
We're using fund
because
balance, which could
These grants are
otherwise-
reimbursement basis, so,
Yeah.
to begin with. So you have to kind of fork out the money, if you will, to pay the salaries and the non-salaries before you can even get reimbursed. So now it's just delaying that even more. So we rely heavily on our fund balance to support these until we can get reimbursed.
Is there a way we could quantify that and give that information to John? Because it,
Mm-hmm.
at very least, a talking point to our legislators to say, did you know that
That's going to, sure,
that's
yeah,
happening?
easily done. So I will get that to him, and actually I'll give it to him, see if maybe, depending on Friday, how Friday goes, can maybe work that in as well.
One more random thing while we're talking about tax revenue here. I know final winter tax payments are coming in right now. Has there been any discussion with the assessor about taxable values for 2013 projections, whether or not I know the market's recovered or starting to recover,
Yeah.
whether or
Yeah.
not taxable values are going to be
Yeah.
rising for
We
2013?
haven't started that conversation yet. It will come very shortly, though,
Okay.
as we really start to gear up, believe it or not, to budget for 13, 14, so.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is the purchasing agenda. I don't know if you have any questions on there. The Cambridge and basis policy are related to
Right.
the donations that
Right.
you just approved to move forward.
I I had two questions. First, the KISD projects, how do they relate to our transformation plan, I notice?
I can address that. We would have taken that under the center program facilities, but there's really only one that's impacted by the transformation plan, and that's at Wellerwood. There were two projects there. One, we installed a bathroom that we're essentially complete with, and the other is the wireless infrastructure. We put that on hold until the decision on the transformation plan is made, and if, based on the plan, we would not install that. We'd look at relocating that someplace else.
I'm just curious about the copier. What do we use that for? Are we replacing something else, or is this new? Will be a shift in how we do printing? Or?
It would be a shift in how we do printing. Currently, we contract a lot of that out, and so when we look at something like the GRASP program, we contract that out. And so Mr. Finn and Mr. Helmholtz have done quite a bit of research and looking at, is it more beneficial to bring that back in-house, and can we save some money? And both feel that we all feel that this is something that will save the district a little bit of money to bring that back in-house.
I wonder if it will aid in facility and doing marketing or doing literature as well.
It was right. Yep.
I'd like to use it.
Questions? Purchasing agenda?
Okay. Next up is a warm, safe, and dry update. Mr. Klump-Harris.
Just, most everything on the summary sheet is the same. We have added Creston in based on the transformation plan that we'll need to move forward with the Creston heating controls up improvements, preparing for city to move over there. You can see we haven't spent a lot of money, but we need to get started. The other thing that we'll be doing is for the next finance committee, bringing a proposed recommended warm, safe, and dry list, a new version with priorities based on the transformation plan.
Okay.
We need to, because the finance committee will actually be ahead of the board action, we can make a contingent on the action or revise later. But in order to make the timetables, we need to move forward on this. So that's our intent for next month.
Questions for Mr. Klump-Harris? Thank you.
All right, next we have our budget calendar update. We are right on target. We're continuing to work through, as I spoke earlier, about projections for staffing, actual salaries for this current year, and that actually helps to drive our average salaries that we're projecting for the next school year as well. And then when you vote in December on our transformation plan, then that will further give us direction, and we'll really start that budget process with full force. Okay? All right, we did legislative. Mr. Klump-Harris, do you want to speak a little bit more detail about the center program facility projects?
And if you look at the sheet that's in your packet, most of these projects will get done towards the spring and early summer. But the large one that's going on right now is the electrical service upgrade at the Lincoln campus. That's from the consumer's feed in. It's a looped system. That should be completed by the end of December. It required a number of pieces that were done so we could do shutdowns on Saturdays and not affect their operation. But it will upgrade that electrical service that was 50 years old. So there will be some reliability and power to the site. That's really the large project that's going on right now.
I wonder if you want to talk through the process of how this list is actually developed.
Each fall, typically in November, there is a walkthrough of all the shared facilities and reviewing how they're used, what they're used for, who's using what.
Shared meaning with the ISD?
With the ISD. And to be truthful, that's what started the thought of combining Mayfield and Oakley into one facility that's part of the transformation plan, where they utilize to their maximum extent. Coming out of that is a request to all the facilities for improvements that are then submitted and vetted through the ISD Special Ed Committee. there's a recommendation. Typically, we'll get $2 to $3 million worth of requests, and the amount that, for funding is something less than 700,000. So there's priorities put to each one, and a recommendation on that committee then decides where we'll go, what will go forward or what won't. And we typically, JRPS, we manage these projects in these facilities. We do not, we can do the work with our forces. Typically, we do not. We contract it out and manage the projects, and then it's on a July 1st to June 30th fiscal cycle.
Any questions? All right. Next on the agenda is the legal services review. A request from last month's committee meeting. Mr. O'Connor requested that maybe we go through our legal services because I believe on the agenda at that time was an increase to some of our legal costs. So what I've provided to you is a look back to 2007, 2008 for our 5 major legal counsel firms, and I just gave a very brief description as well on the work that that we consult with them on.
It was interesting. It made me raise some questions about the past that I don't need to ask, but one of the things I'm wondering if it's possible is to break it down further, not just in terms of the law firms, but in terms of what we're using it for in the district, whether it be contract related, union contract related, or whether it be whatever it might be, so that we have some sense of where we're spending the legal fees in terms of
Within each,
well,
so like if you look at Varnum, for example.
I don't want it to be so detailed, but I guess I just want some. Does that make sense to you? What I'm asking?
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is you sort of broken it down about what category each individual firm has consulted with the district upon.
Right.
But I'm sure that to see the trajectory of why some of those things may have changed. I mean, knowing that there may have been a contract negotiated one year which required a law firm to participate for a larger period of time for a bargaining session, whereas in other years, and especially just looking back, I mean, in years past, 4 or 4 years ago, there was some substantial fees that, several $100,000 higher than what they are today. I mean, I'm thankfully they're much less today than they were back then, but some of the other ones seem to be going up.
Okay. I think I understand what you're requesting, so I want to reiterate it just so that I know I'm on the same page. So if I look at Varnum, for example, in 2007, 2008, we spent about $179,000.
What was happening during that time?
What was happening during that time that caused that increase? Because if you look then in recent years, it's only been, from $60,000 to $80,000. So in 2007,
That was that large bond?
well, we issued our second series of bonds, plus we did an advance refunding. But that's the type of information you're looking to receive to know why there's such a variance from that year compared to the others. Okay. All right, and number 8 under reports was our trust agreements. When we presented the annual financial statements at the October Finance Committee, we thought it might be good. I think there was a request to know about the trust funds and what they can be used for. So I provided you a document that lists out each of those trust awards, whether they're expendable or non-expendable. If it's a non-expendable trust amount, we can only spend any of the accumulated income, so any of the interest we've earned. So I've listed that as well. I've put it on there what we phrase the control officer, who makes the decisions on how the monies are awarded, or to whom the monies are awarded, and then the use for each of those. So it's It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Can I ask if there's an overhead, I mean, what degree of overhead is associated with managing these? Like a $525 non-expendable trust? What is your staff overhead in managing it? If it's more than $122, I'd be a little worried, which, that isn't very much time on your staff's part.
No, there's really just a few times a year when staff are touching these, and it's really, the bulk is at the end of the year. One, when we're preparing the financial statements, but two, nearing the end of the school year, when we're updating information to provide to the control officers so they know how much they can award to particular individuals. We go through and look at how much was the accumulated income. Is there enough for them to even make an award? So there is a little bit of time at that point.
For the Board of Education General Trust Fund, I mean, I was reading here that says should not be non-expendable with a balance of less than $20,000. We only have $18,280. How are the funds, if that's the Board of Ed's money, how are those funds dictated to that account or placed in that account, or is there some kind of past precedent where a certain amount of BOE funds are deposited into that account, or how does that work exactly?
No, it's not a transfer. I'd have to go look up the exact history on this one because I don't know that off the top of my head. But we don't do a transfer into this account from year to year. It was probably established one point, so I could certainly look that up for you.
I'm just saying, if there's $18,000 in there and we're not expending it because we don't have the required $20,000, I'm sure this board would be maybe amenable to making a transfer to that fund so that we could be giving an award to a valedictorian or a salutatorian if in fact they met the criteria.
I will look into that one for you.
All right.
Because I'm curious myself now. Some of these documents are very old.
Yeah.
I should have put on here in hindsight, and can go back and do that and send this to you electronically. I should have put the year
Yeah,
when they were
would be
first
fascinating.
Yeah.
received, because
Yeah.
some of the documentation in our office is, the paper is now yellow.
Yeah.
Well, and also
So
like
old.
looking at the, Central High School Scholarship Award of 1926,
Yeah.
while it's only $1,400 in there, Central High School no longer exists in its original capacity. Does that
Yeah.
$1,400 just float in limbo for the?
What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to go back to whoever the current
Trustee?
trustee is for the fund and seek permission to change the terms of it. So there are a number, you're right, there are a number on here where it lists Central High School that we have to go back and research
French
that.
student. There's no French in
There's no French.
public schools anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. The one I
It's
do
such
want
a
to
linear
point out, because it relates, could be a connection to our transformation plan. On the third page, there's the Pugsley Trust. And that's a non-expendable trust, but right now, there's an income amount of $68,000. And the use for that is educational, health, tutoring, and clothing needs of individual GRPS elementary students. And it's that generic of a use description. So potentially, if you do go down the route of implementing school uniforms, we could certainly look at using a portion of those proceeds to assist our families with that.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
We're doing it.
Is that the end of the agenda?
I believe so.
You're at the
I have a request, and this is in regards to the transformation plan. I know we've had general financials about it, but in my own mind, I'd like a little bit more specificity on the cost of new programs that we're proposing, both the capital costs and the, ongoing operational costs of those programs. I know it's approximate, it's not going to be, but it would be helpful to see that. And I'm thinking about the IB Arts, of some of the other programs, whether there's additional costs or what those additional costs will be beyond what we're doing, the expansions of the K-8s or whatever they might be, and what the sources of that revenue will be.
So
I mean, some of
you're
it will
not
be-
just looking at the future growth, you're really looking at the the entire plan,
Right.
and not just the cost
I
that
should
we
have
maybe
looked at it more.
provided
I
with
should
you on
have
that one page.
I looked at it carefully and then I didn't write it down. I should be, instead of giving you this vague request, maybe I'll just put it in an email more specific, so
All right.
that it isn't just this large request. But I just wanted to nail down a little bit more about the intendant. And I know, like, for instance, with the IB program, there's going to be philanthropy requests. So to some extent, it seems like the board should be, to vote on this, should have a ballpark estimate of what those are going to be. That's part of our policy anyway, looking forward. But then I started seeing other aspects of the transformation plan that, I was wondering where the source of revenue, or where we were shifting that, or where that was coming from. I can't think of them for the life of me, but I had them in my head. So I'll go back and look at them specifically, because some of them are just, added pupils or whatever that might be.
Right, okay. And then you'll send that to us in an email so that we can,
Our next meeting will be the same day we vote, won't it?
it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is December 17th.
So, yeah, I don't know if that information might be something valuable to bring to the full board before that vote.
I would think so.
So, either at the work
Well, the
session or
sooner,
that
yeah, I was going to
first
say,
full
the
board
sooner
meeting.
you get it to us, the better.
Okay, I'll do it this
Because then
afternoon.
we
So
could,
We have a board meeting on the 3rd, right?
Right.
and then a
I'll
work
send it to
session
you
on the
this
10th.
afternoon.
So
And a work session.
worst case, we could, get it to you by the 10th, but depending on when you get that and what it entails, possibly could have it for the December 3rd meeting, which would really mean that we would have to have it done in the next day or two, because it
That's
would
right,
need to be
to
in the
have on the
packet.
agenda.
So that might not
Okay,
happen.
right.
But worst case, we could get it to you in time,
For the work session.
at least for the
following
work
week.
session, even sooner than having it go out in an official packet for the work session. Then it would give you time to review.
All right, great, thanks. All right,
That's all that we had.
thank you.